Thank you, everybody, for coming today. It's really exciting to connect with you guys directly. As you may have noticed, we've been keeping our heads down, working, well, I guess as we normally do, 7 days a week. But we've been building something truly remarkable. And it's like they say, the last 5% is always the hardest. And this certainly has been a very hard time. And just the amount of things that had to be literally invented to solve for wireless trade to be able to truly enable this globally, while also managing an internet-based version. So it's been very, very cool. In today's AMA, we're going to focus on answering questions, but I want to kick off for the first couple of minutes and talk about the strategy behind what's coming up. So everyone here is basically pre-marketing. So we are going to do a number of different campaigns to grab segments of people. And this marketing strategy relies on a core community, understanding how everything works. Basically, we need to give you guys the strategy to know what kind of things we're going to be doing over the next couple of months. And then you guys become the points of reference as the onslaught of new people coming in, figuring out how to do this stuff, learning. You guys become the both the experts, but also the service providers. So there's going to be huge opportunities for savvy people to start, businesses off of this. And our small business program is the backbone of our strategy moving forward. So the strength of any marketing campaign is its background. Now, let's look at the marketing strategy for the wireless nodes. The wireless miner is something, well, let me tell you the consequence of it. The consequence in a good way. The consequence is if I'm in any country on the planet, I can get to Bitcoin no matter what. That means life and death to some people in some places. But to people in more developed countries like the United Kingdom or the United States or India or China, in these countries with very developed infrastructure, rapidly the doors are closing to achieve true decentralization. What we're getting is these limpy, terrible versions that don't support the original thesis of Bitcoin, which is basically personal property. Making Bitcoin wireless is a huge deal. It's why we have been so focused on creating this node end to end so that when it's ready, people can simply plug in to the internet version and you have a bridge to the wireless version. Now, you can imagine if I said that a device could get you access to Bitcoin, that doesn't mean a lot to the regular person. What means more to them is access to information and access to texting and messaging. So out the gate, this wireless miner supports the ability to send messages as well as trade. And that, I can't wait to see how it's going to pan out. But what it really ends up becoming is a ecosystem of its own. As we've fallen into this and just partnership after partnership, huge supporters of all kinds, from the NFT Museum to 111 to the infrastructure behind our new hardware development team. All of that is because of this vision, which is that there could be a new internet. And not one of these crappy, hey, we're making a new internet, but it's on the same internet kind of coins. Literally a brand new internet. It's like the explorers of the New World had the same situation, where before going to the Americas, you had this dream of, well, there's some place that's totally untouched, that isn't the industrial Europe, that is this new opportunity for anyone who's willing to go. And that links back to my statement with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the original asset of digital gold, but more importantly, it represents individual property and the right to own digital land, arguably. If you don't have your private keys, you don't own that Bitcoin. If you're forced to store your private keys with someone else, it's not your Bitcoin. It's the same problem with developing Europe. It's why people went to the New World, the opportunity to own land. In the Overline wireless world, you need your private key and you own the coins. And what that means is you can send them wherever you want at any amount you want. If you can only send 0.00005 Ethereum from your Binance account, it's not your Ethereum. It's Binance's Ethereum that you gave to them. In the Overline universe, you can send all of the Ethereum you have or none of the Ethereum, but it's yours and it's your property. Philosophically, it's cool, but business-wise, we've matured a lot in understanding what a revenue model is going forward. And we've needed to as we've developed deeper integrations with other companies. If we look at the wireless mining presale or the wireless mining launch, we have decided to structure it as a two-tiered event, which we're trying to get rid of the insanity of the first launch of any drop popular thing. Right now, things like a helium node, for example, are $1,000 when it's really about $20 worth of hardware. Like, it's insane. And you have these people who are already in the have-nots category where you can't even afford to get one. So we've developed a ticket system where you'll be able to acquire and guaranteed to be able to acquire a wireless node if you have a ticket. And these tickets, you can get them either at our pop-up shop. So we'll have a couple different pop-up shop locations around the world. The first one will be in New York, and then you'll be able to get them online. And this will be happening simultaneously. Once you have a ticket, you are guaranteed to be able to get a wireless miner. With a ticket, you also can, collect them or trade them or even move them from a pre-sale standpoint into the predictive markets. And I don't want to get too complicated with it, but what we see here is an opportunity to help the premise of launching new products, because we know it's going to be a meteoric, unbelievable amount of demand. We already know that. We've run multiple tests. We've run fake Facebook ad campaigns just to see what kind of click. It basically goes viral. It's crazy. When we put this thing onto an advertisement, people share it organically. Because imagine the premise, like, here's a device where you can finally send all of your cryptocurrencies in all of the amount without getting into the scary internet world where you're going to get all your coins stolen, and you can transfer them, trade them, and interact with DeFi contracts. That's another thing that's important to note here, is that we're not trying to do this stupid, pick our chain over the other chain. We're just trying to make all chains wireless. So that means you can send an Ethereum DeFi transaction, which really is still becoming ridiculously expensive, but you can send a DeFi transaction from your Overline wireless node, trigger an Ethereum DeFi trade, swap, minting event. And when you do it, you'll end up never having touched the internet. So you can create the entire transaction and run it entirely on the Overline network without ever having had to log in online, without ever having left your wallet. One of the ways we've been looking at positioning these wireless miners, and this falls into like your guys' responsibility to help us evangelize this and support it, is that these are basically a wireless wallet as well. They can store all of your assets, but it forces you to keep it a cold wallet. These Overline nodes don't have any way to withdraw themselves unless you decrypt them, but they also don't ever end up logging into your computer where all of the virus universe can live. So it's like a cold wallet that always stays cold, even though you can do hot wallet things with it. In other words, you might not know, if you're new to the crypto space, that because your wallet is on your phone doesn't mean it's safe. It actually means it's very insecure. As your net worth becomes more in the crypto universe, leaving it on your phone, leaving it on your computer is a ridiculous place to store it. You cannot do that. All of the Overline wireless world forces you and enables you to live in a situation where you're incredibly secure in the management of your assets. Your assets are much safer than an internet world and exponentially safer than living inside of your computer, storing private keys in your computer, anything like that. Everything's encrypted two-way the entire time. It's an amazing way to do this. It's basically, it's so easy, it's so logical. People will wonder why we just didn't do this from the start. Okay, so I'm gonna more questions if you guys have them.
I have a question. Can these transactions, do they show up any differently on these other blockchains? Like, can you tell just looking at, for example, the Ethereum chain, if a transfer was wireless or not?
Oh, very smart. No, unless you wanted them to. They will appear as if they were regular Ethereum transactions. You will use the Overline regular internet, obviously, to interact with the Ethereum mainnet nodes and the ETH2 nodes. I do think it's kind of an interesting idea if you had a little flag on there that indicated this was done wirelessly, because you could build smart contract logic around some of that, like only permit people to participate in your NFT or in your coin if they did it wirelessly. I'm just gonna, because you guys are here and you guys are early and you guys are in the community, I'm gonna give you how I would game out making sure that I can get one of these wireless nodes. The first thing we're gonna do is offer these boxes. These boxes, when you open them or unlock them, contain every one of them a guaranteed ticket to buy one of the wireless nodes. The boxes are physical. Either they'll be at one of our drop points or pop-up shops, or they're digital. And they work a lot like trading card games, where you open up the card game, you don't know what you're going to get. That's really one of the cool things here, because these boxes will have things that you don't know what you're going to get. We're going to hide all sorts of stuff in the boxes. We love hiding things. And so as people buy these, they're also buying the right to open a box. Everything's encrypted in it. And obviously when you open it, then you have all of these assets inside. We'll be awarding people things like Overline. We'll be awarding them things like NFTs, big ones, and then some other very cool redeemable hardware stuff with some partnerships that we haven't been able to announce yet. But it's a mystery box. That's what you buy when you pre-order one of these nodes. The box itself is tradable. So there is a secondary market for that out the gate. We'll be releasing them in waves. And in order to get out of the whole hot swap, server load issues, we're going to do our best to have very clear schedules. Like there'll be this much available in this wave. That's important because the tickets really do guarantee that when you bring in that ticket, and it's just a signature. So the ticket is a tradable fee and a coin, but it's a signature that once you sign in, you can just put in your shipping address and you're done. Like it's very, very easy, but it is something that you can stack. And so there's actually two universes here. First is you could get in with the hype people and try to get one in one of the drops online or in store. The second one is to snipe them off the open market. I've learned a lot from this whole space. Everyone's learned a lot from this whole space. One thing we all know is that there's a lot of speculators in the midst of people trying to build real stuff, build real hardware. Those speculators become distracted quickly. And so sniping tickets from a speculator is totally an option in the secondary markets. The Overline swap, as you can see, we've held back in order to finish the ticketing system, but also we've had a couple of sicknesses in our lead design team, namely, and he's recovered just fine because no disease can impact JMB, but namely him getting better. But in terms of how to game it, you have these two universes where you can pick them up. So even if you can't get them in the first drop, you can pick them in the secondary. And then there's going to be this entire universe built around the NFT Museum. It's a huge deal. The NFT Museum is a meteoric-sized company that literally New York's greatest architects are working on. Like it is a surreal project. It is the bridge between the digital world and the physical world. And it is a bridge basically competing directly with Facebook. And I think that's nuts. Sorry, Meta. I mean, to say like Facebook is a behemoth, but the kinds of guys and the kinds of partnerships backing the NFT Museum are fully capable of taking on that company. So they're creating a different universe. They're creating a different way to present NFTs. We had a small conversation with Greg, who's a mastermind behind the museum. And that conversation, that podcast, for those of you who caught it, is huge in terms of what we might be turning into NFTs. And that's something that you guys, the trader in me is telling you, trader being like quant, arbiter, however you want to put it. NFTs are going to change in a really big way. And the NFT museum is the gateway to get to that. Figuring out the NFT world is something you need to do. Then I'm not saying go buy an ape. That's a bad idea. It's a funny crowd to watch. But I am saying figure it out and figure out what the NFTs do, because they're a way to tie a physical asset to digital dollars, not just a digital asset. So, Lucifer, you had a question.
I was just asking, so you said pop-up shops, right? Do we have a timeline around it, and how do these pop-up shops work? And you also said that it's through the ticketing system that one can acquire these wireless miners. So let's say I'm a user, I went to one of these pop-up shops. How do I get a ticket there?
So, a pop up shop has a couple of different things. It has merchandise, the long awaited founder's hoodie. It has things like the Overline hardware node that you can actually hold, touch, mess around with, that sort of thing. But it also has these black boxes, and each one of them contains a private key with a ticket on it, and maybe something else. The black box, I don't really know, but they're just these small black cubes that are mystery boxes.
Again, so if I have to purchase one of these black boxes, it will have to be an OL trade, right?
Will not have to be an OL trade. It will be available on Overline. It'll be available as a credit card purchase as well. It's one of those things that it's an actual product. The same thing goes for the purchase of the wireless node itself. Like when you buy a mystery box offline, it's going to be a physical box with a private key in it. When you buy it online, it's going to be a digital representation of that box, also with an encrypted private key on it that interacts with our servers, so that when you hit unlock, you're going to decrypt that and basically change that asset type to unlock whatever was hidden in the mystery.
Okay. And any timeline around it?
I'm hesitant to give a fixed timeline. Here's what we know. We know that we can't get more than 50,000 chips until around February. So we can't ship till February, which is ridiculously annoying. But we want to time the pre-sale launch to then hit somewhere in late December, early January to go with those shipping dates. What's going to be interesting here is to see how the demand meets with the convergence of the Bitcoin correction and altcoins. So, as everyone here likely knows, after every major Bitcoin correction, there's just this altcoin craze and also this fundraising craze, not because of our own timing, but we just happen to be exactly lined up with that correction, start offering these wireless nodes.
Okay.
We expect hundreds of thousands of them to be pre-sold. I'm expecting them on the pop-up shop locations. We're commissioning, like, we'll have to pay for security, and based on like New York law, we actually have to hire police based on our estimates of the inbound people to just help with like foot traffic. So we imagine, like, popularity wise, it's going to be very hard to get this first batch. The question is, how much of the first batch can we get? So that's really our challenge right now. But our timeline is, and for there's going to be clear, details on when these sales are going to be happening, and then
Okay.
hopefully shipping as soon as February.
Given that you guys are targeting Q1 2022, I assume you already have all the designs and specifications finalized. Do you plan on releasing it anytime soon?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I believe we should release the wireless spec. Something that we have done is we've reached out to a bunch of circuit board developers with the intent of actually leaking the design. And that's in countries that may find these nodes more popular than others. The goal is also to have copycats developing as fast as possible. I think that there'll be copycats coming in very quickly that will interact with the Overline network and compete directly with us at a hardware level. That's actually very good for the Overline network. So we purposely leaked some of those designs. I imagine those will get out pretty quickly. We will launch a software spec as soon as that's clear. Right now, your relationship with a Overline wireless node is done entirely through the mobile phone. So you'll download a mobile app. The borderless company will be the issue, American Centurion. And then in that app, you're going to interact with the node over Bluetooth. The node is interacting on its own antenna stack, not just LoRa. It's interacting on a number of different spectrums to do what Overline nodes do. Overline nodes use proof of distance in a way that allows us to interact with the radio space in new ways. So, for example, when you go to an Overline conference next year, you won't actually need a badge. We take a snapshot of your radio profile as a human being, and that is your identity. You can walk in and out of the conference without any pass or key or anything, and it knows you because you walked right by our Overline node. That functionality is based on the other antennas that are embedded in this device. So proof of distance as an algorithm is an algorithm taken from the radio space to remove noise. But proof of distance itself, cosine similarity, and doing Fourier transforms are actually our secret sauce. The reason that Overline is called Overline is that there is a universe around us and above us that we do not interact with in the radio static space, and an Overline node is going to let you do that. But I don't want to get too complicated. We've learned too complicated ends up with lots of people who don't know how to do stuff. So the point is, an Overline node has technology in it that lets us upgrade and diversify ourselves so that no one has ever seen anything like this, but it will be able to do things that no other piece of technology in a person's home can do.
Yeah, one last question. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned helium is about $1,000, $1,000. Now, do you have any numbers in mind for the Overline miner price?
That's a good question. We did market tests. Clearly, helium nodes were not originally sold at that price. That is what the market is pricing them at in the secondary markets, eBay and whatnot. I want to get the price down to $100. I think that's very achievable. I also think it completely opens the gate to a whole new demographic of people. It's also pretty crazy when you think about it. This is a helium node, but it has no wire. So it's just a logical evolution. Like it's something you can hold in your hand. It is more powerful than the helium node. It has a longer range than the helium node because it was designed specifically for this. We spent 4 years building the circuit board custom. It is built to do exactly this. The price point, I don't know what it's going to do on the secondary markets. So I know that we'll pre-sale at a lower price. If Ethereum fees continue to be crazy, we may try to do things like deploy on counterparty. I don't know. We'll see. I know that right now we're looking at doing a surprise launch of things like Rare Pepe and Rare Doge on Overline, just to give people the ability to tap into NFTs directly in the Bitcoin world. It's just a much cooler, cheaper way to do it. But yeah, so price point is we're targeting $100. Depends on what the secondary markets do with that. Master, I know you have a question.
Hey, so I have a couple of questions, and hopefully they spark some interesting discussion. The first one is, do the emblems play a role in wireless mining?
Yeah, very good question. Wireless mining is all about bandwidth, wireless bandwidth. So when a node attempts to add a transaction into the chain, when you're wirelessly mining, what you're actually doing is using our custom hardware to exchange fingerprints of static. It's not complicated. It's literally exactly what I just said. Like, don't overthink it. We take static in the universe around you and we exchange it between peers. Whoever has the most similar static amongst each other wins the right to route that mine transaction. That opens up a huge world that's three-dimensional for wireless mining. The thing with wireless mining, though, is whose transaction gets to get into the block ends up getting that trade. And so miners need to sort transactions by inbound relayed messages. So when I have an Overline node and it's mining, what it's really doing is it's handing transactions that it picks up in the wireless world, signing them with its own key, its own address, and sending them on to the Overline network. When it does that, it has address that has an emblem balance. That emblem balance tells the miner which transactions to add to a block first, but it also allows the miner to sort them. So if I'm walking down the street in Mumbai, there are lots of wireless miners. Many of them may submit similar transactions at the same time. A miner picks the transaction that allows it to earn the most, right? But it also allows it to fit the most into a block. This is the big part. With enough emblems at that miner's address, it is worth it for the miner to actually pick up the transaction for free. And this is a part of the emblem algorithm that we haven't discussed yet because we've needed the wireless miner to demonstrate it. But what emblems do is they expand the size of blocks. They allow a miner to fit transactions in for free, essentially, but they allow the miner to fit them in and earn a little bit more, plus add more to a block. So as you guys have noticed, like if you have a full block, that's worth a lot more than not having a full block. It is much easier to get to a full block when you're doing it with wireless mining nodes that have emblems at their balance. So basically, with around 10,000 to 15,000 emblems, you have free service forever. That's how the economics play out, is you can interact with Overline as long as you have a balance of emblems for nothing. We see those people as the modern version of a broker. They're going to be the guys who can interact with Overline all the time. They're going to have their own chat rooms. They're going to have their own messaging systems, their own data lines. We're looking at a custom Filecoin node, for example, where like you'll have that balance and then be able to stream onto the network using that balance. It's just a way to organize bandwidth, but yeah, the biggest part of emblems is the fact that they actually represent bandwidth, not just GPU mining power.
That is really interesting. That's a super cool dynamic.
Yeah, that's actually in all the miners now. The algorithm is already out in the software, so you're running it. You're running a Runhook miner, the oil miner, all of them.
This kind of leads to the second question. How do the wireless mined transactions make the jump into blocks? So like, do block miners need some kind of antenna in order to read those?
Great question. So initially, the block miners will need an Overline node. What's cool is that the Overline nodes speak a very straightforward language for hardware devices in the IoT landscape. So very quickly, they'll be compatible with like AWS IoT. What that means is that if you have an Overline node and you want to mine, you can plug it into your Linksys Wi-Fi hotspot, and suddenly you're now mining wirelessly by picking up those transactions and routing them. To put it more visually, even though we don't have a visual platform, but if in your head you visualize it, you have a wireless node in your hand that emits a transaction. It broadcasts a transaction in 360 degrees. The other nodes who are around, if they're not connected to the internet, can still mine. They grab your transaction, sign it, and wrap it with their hash, and then emit it again, which creates the mesh network-like functionality of Overline. Once a node is reached with your transaction, it might have been wrapped and signed 50 times, before it hits a node with an internet connection. But once it does, that node then signs it with its address and submits it to the Overline network exactly the same way that you broadcast to the BitTorrent network or the Ethereum network now. Like you'll submit it to a series of addresses that you're peering with. All of that is done through the miner itself. So the miner can either plug in a Overline hotspot to its own computer, the same way that we develop with them now. Like I'm sitting next to a bunch of Overline wireless miners. We develop with them, we test with them, and we just plug them directly into the computer to interact with the Overline world. we, for a while, were broadcasting in New York City 24/7, doing long range testing, the Declaration of Independence, just nonstop from our Overline hardware nodes. But when you're mining, you will need an antenna of some kind to interact with this universe. You also need an antenna because there is a custom hardware component that listens to a very specific modulation and acts in a very specific way with the Overline network, and so you'll need that. Ultimately, that one antenna can be priced down to like $6 if you really break it down to like a USB plugin. So we see doing like a USB plugin that goes into the Filecoin network, that goes into the Dish network, the upcoming 5G boxes, free nodes, all that stuff, where it's just a USB plugin that you just plug it in. And that just has your address on it. So there's the universe where you're interacting with the one that's in your hand, and there's the universe that you're interacting with the one that's in USB. Both of them are already developed. It's just a question of getting the right supply of chips and finishing the protocol layer stuff that goes on the hardware side.
That's pretty sweet. And if you're someone who wants to get involved as soon as possible, what's the best way to make sure that you can get a wireless miner or get a mining antenna?
We obviously, I mean, everyone here, look, there's 45 people here. This is, you're also getting information that we haven't tweeted, we haven't written about. Like, these are the early players. Just stay in the Discord, stay in touch. But the other way that we'll be giving away wireless miner tickets is to everybody who has active roles in the community, admins, people who are doing things like mining pools. Like, just DM us and get you something. We will be releasing spec documents on this stuff very quickly because, in my opinion, the greatest business in the universe is going to be the guy who's market making for cities like Hong Kong, for cities like Beijing, New York. I mean, can you imagine like being the only guy taking orders coming out in the wireless world, basically getting a first look at them and then emitting them out to the Overline network? It's just unbelievable. It's the ultimate money printing machine to be a wireless market maker. The technology we're using is not new to the financial space. When you bring this up to like a hedge fund guy, they're like, "Oh, nice." So like 65, it's like 65 gigahertz, which is direct link stuff. So 65 gigahertz is where they're trading with like point to point wireless connections rather than using fiber because the connection is so much faster. This is a similar thing, only it's like taking that thing that was only available for the hedge funds and now making it available to everybody. It's just point to point trading. If you're doing a business as well, I mean, a huge part of this is just helping people get their own wireless miners set up. You're talking to a really smart kid in the Helium network. He's a kid, like literally a young man, and he's 16 now. He set up a leasing network where he has a large amount of inventory of Helium nodes. He'll allow you to mine from your location, and you rent the node from him and share the profits. Same sort of advantages you're going to see in the Overline world. Our range is much longer, but the volume is going to be much larger. Because if you think about it, so here's one stunt. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I do want to go far into it because I want you guys to research this because it's nuts. Human beings are very large sources of static in the radio universe. Overline nodes help you explore that. So if I'm a human being and I'm giving off a certain level of static, I'm sure if you guys listen to The Climb, there are things that you can do with that static. There are readings you can take on the human being that no one's ever seen anything like it before. Building and helping people get to those services are going to be whole businesses as big as things like blockchain.com, FTX.com, these companies where there are layers that they're using the technology of Bitcoin or blockchain technology to create a new kind of business vertical. The wireless world of like, is someone happy, is readable in some of the static profiles, or are they having a heart attack, is readable in their static profiles. You can actually research and see. So there's this universe of radio is something that we need to study. Radio is about to get very interesting again in the world. It's not just FM, AM, Wi-Fi, 3G, 5G, long-fi. Those are all ways to broadcast. They aren't ways to listen. Overline nodes are the first device that lets you listen different. And so you can listen to like a group of people. What we were measuring weird things like, are you compatible? I don't know if this is a thing. There are people's static interference that they have similar levels of interference. We don't know if that's compatibility, but it is kind of interesting to think about. Great questions, obviously. These are great questions, Master.
Thank you. And would I be correct in thinking that having this wireless mining setup how it is would also have the happy effect of preventing mining centralization?
Oh yeah, no, that's over with wireless mining. You can't proof of distance. So the problem with helium that really bothers me is the same problem with Cosmos. You have to trust something. You just do. And because you do, you unlock the world of centralization. And it's a virus. It spreads quickly. It becomes Uniswap, a great idea, bad execution. If you look to the wireless mining world and then you enforce things like proof of distance, you can be a nobody and beat somebody with the biggest hardware setup possible because you're geolocationally closer than the other guy. It's just the way that it is. And that's not just like an assumption. It's mathematically provable. Like there's an entropy score between two nodes in the radio space that things like NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, use to define randomness. Like static as a fingerprint is going to completely change the game. Now, you guys, I'm not saying like, hey, it's like, because all of this is everyone here. I'd argue that everyone here has a beyond above average IQ. There's no reason that you'd be interested in this project if you didn't already have some savvy smarts to you. I'm not trying to like suck up to the community. I'm trying to like, it's just arguably who in the world even knows what a multi-chain means when you walk down the street, let alone that this multi-chain is very weird in the wireless space. But you do know that being different is valuable. And even if you're not one of these people, when you're trying to explain this as a platform, we're going to be explaining it in the ways that are far more palatable. Hey, here's an Overline node. It can tell you who might be compatible with you. That's intriguing. They'll look at it because it's just interesting. It's like I can see a new way to interact with people with it. We and everyone in this chat can know why those things are happening, which is like, wow, there's cool stuff you can pull from individuals' interference. But if you look at this from like a learning curve, wireless and the Overline node is a ticket to the entire crypto universe in a safe way. So before, if you wanted to go to Bitcoin, you need to go to Coinbase, give away your heart, soul, and now bank statements. Scary. And then buy a Bitcoin, and then what? To them, there's just no world. There's something new here. It's scary. And all they've heard is either you're going to get rich quick, which is stupid, or you're going to go try to buy what random project. What the wireless world says is, hey, everything here is different. You're going to get this opportunity to now have Ethereum, but you don't have to worry about it getting hacked ever. And you can't give your Ethereum keys to somebody else. It's all running on the Overline node. So your little Overline node also becomes like this safe little bonsai tree of how to first interact with crypto. So what you guys can do as an audience when you're explaining this to people is say, hey, look, you get an Overline node. It's kind of like a helium node, except you don't have to leave it plugged in. And it lets you buy and sell all these new cryptos. It lets you play in the wireless world, and it lets you do crazy things in the radio space. So it's a ticket to participate in the crypto universe without feeling like you got left behind. You download this app and you're connected. You're going to own some Overline. And then if you leave it running, you leave the Overline node plugged in, it's going to earn you some money. If you're in a big city, it's going to earn you a lot. It's a huge thing. So all this to say, when you're explaining this to people, it's a passive income generator. It's a little device that if you get one, it's going to help you earn crypto, and you're not going to have to give away your soul and your bank statements just to get into the blockchain universe. Borderless money, good question. It's a great name.
Hey, thanks for everything. It's really inspiring, the vision of Overline. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
The first is, do I need to be within the vicinity of a miner, or does it just needs to be a a node, I mean an Overline app connected to the internet within the vicinity of a wireless miner, can that still broadcast transactions to the network?
You do not. All you have to be is within range of any Overline node, internet connected or not. If you're not connected to the internet, that's fine. It'll just broadcast to the local node. The range here in very densely cities like Hong Kong is about 1.5 miles in all directions, 1,000 meters minimum. In terms of out of city, where there's even a little bit of space, we're looking at ranges like 30 miles in all directions. So you will have coverage wherever you are. For 17,000 nodes, we can cover the entire United States, 100% coverage. So we've even thought of just mailing them.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the climb episode, I guess as well. The second question is about what does wireless mining network mean for network bloat? I mean, when this works at scale and we have millions of transactions being processed, does wireless mining network help keep the costs still to a minimum, or do we expect to face situations like the Ethereum network is facing right now?
The answer is I'm obsessed with scale. It's my favorite topic. It's the hardest problem to solve, in my opinion, but also the most interesting. The answer is in the powers of combinatorics with Schnorr signatures. What we ultimately transition to as a network is a pool of what are called panels, which works somewhat like the sharding functionality of the Ethereum network, except that what you're trying to show is not that a message went to someone else, but that a message was delivered to an address. And that delivery means that there will be different kinds of messages. Right now on the network, you can actually go into the code and look at what are called feeds. Feeds we've been testing already. They're our version of a decentralized Twitter. So when you're interacting with us at scale, we're using panels. When you're interacting with us in the immediate universe, we're using feeds. And feeds are very small, lightweight versions of Overline transactions with what's called OPX6, the OPX6 operator. And OPX6 allows you to basically do what Twitter can do, in that we can compress messages and listen to messages without storing all of them on the chain. We will only store the ones that pay to be on the chain. The rest of them will get automatically pruned from the memory pools of the miners around the world based on load. So during periods of high load, you'll have that. The other thing is the wireless miner balance with emblem balances. When you have more than 16,000 EMB at an address, and this is ranging, you could have one EMB at an address and your rewards start to kick in. But scale all the way up to 16,000 and you're looking at fully covering full transactions in what bonus you're providing to a miner when you're submitting transactions. What that also means is that you can expect that those kinds of guys will stay online 24/7. They'll always be a part of the network in terms of conversation. That isn't actually a bad thing. So one of the reasons that the network is congested right now with Ethereum is there are not levels of priority in transactions outside of the pricing scheme. Emblems add a new priority dimension to transactions. So miners are then going to be scooping transactions that have EMB balances of more than 16,000, even though their overline fees might be low. That's going to be magical at keeping fees down for Overline itself, because people are going to, who really need transactions to happen immediately, are going to have large amounts of emblems. For those who don't really need them immediately, or for consumers, they're going to be emitting those transactions and seeing much lower fees necessary to get their transactions into the block. It's fun recognizing some of the names from the Telegram days. So imagine, as some of you may know, we have some very unique partners coming to the network. Hold on, we got James.
First of all, thanks for the AMA. That's all really interesting. I'm still trying to wrap my head around can I be found? Can someone find me? Because obviously I'm part of a network and there is a radio wave locating me somewhere. That might be a silly question, but that's something I'm worried about and that might be on people's minds.
It's not, and this goes back to defending my argument that this is just a smarter group of people. So you're right. If you play this out in your head and you're in an environment that doesn't like that you can talk and that doesn't like that you can listen, basically an environment that would like to censor you, either financially or intellectually, you can't be censored on an overline node. And here's why. In order for you to track a radio signal right now, what you need to do is use what's called an active link. Basically, radio right now is all active link. Active link means that it's transmitting something to a receiver who's then decoding that transmission. When you transmit like that, you're triangulating the positions of the receiver and the transmitter and using that to pick up where you are. So you run two antennas. A radio sniffer, for example, has two antennas on it, minimum. Some have 4 or even 8. But it measures the difference between the speed that a transaction was received on one of the antennas in order to begin evaluating which direction you're transmitting from to track you down. In order to remove the ability to track this entirely, we switched to a passive model. Passive is awesome because what passive means is we don't care where the receiver is. We don't have a directional component, and the message itself is designed to bounce. So when we broadcast, if there's a tree, it can bounce off the tree. And it works using the same standard that like LoRa chirping works at, but the custom radio component works using static. Now this is big because static at 126 kilohertz is very different from static at 915 megahertz. At 126 kilohertz, you can take a fingerprint that is ridiculously disruptible. The entropy score at that size, the randomness of radio patterns at 126 kilohertz is very, very different. What this does is it first does not require you to run an active transmission, which means you're just pulsing one pulse. You could be anywhere in a 30-mile grid. But then because of the relaying capabilities of the network, you don't know how many times something's been relayed. It might have been relayed 50 times, it could be relayed 0 times. So adding 2 overline nodes immediately creates a barrier. Once you get to 3, you have an exponentially rising difficulty to ever find an overline node within any bounds of it, because you don't know which one it is. When you start tracking is the second part of it. So now let's say we're in an adversarial environment, which is, it's bad. Whatever it is, it's very bad. These are actually still designed to live in that. And the reason they're designed to live in that is something called timid turtle, which is an algorithm that we built into this to, what that means is we can send schematics or fly a glider, and we can drop battery-powered versions of the overline nodes into these areas. And they're all are running timid turtle, which means that they will relay your transaction and do so quite nicely until they detect anybody messed with them. What that means is mess with them is anyone who's transmitting anything that doesn't reach the signatures or the static of a regular transaction. So the person could send a transaction, try to find it, it needs you to chirp, so it needs you to relay. So it might send an odd number of transactions or more transactions than 1 minute, which if you're trying to track in the radio space, you have to send transactions within 1 second to track. You need to be broadcasting all the time to get it so that you can dig through the noise in the radio static to find out where you are. So when you're doing that, the timid turtle algorithm kicks in. What that means is it's going to go into its shell for a random period between 1 and 2 years. The cool thing with that is after a while, you have hundreds, potentially thousands of overline nodes, all battery powered, possibly deployed by us, maybe deployed by the community, who are randomly coming in and out of their shells depending on interruption. And at that point, you have an impervious network. It's just infeasible. You'll never be able to get them all. Even then, after 2 years, you'll have the guy out there, and he's still going to be picking them up. They'll have ones waking up at that point. So they're designed to either, the answer is, one, we use passive, which is ridiculously hard to track, if not impossible, when you add even a few nodes. And then on top of that, we have timid turtle, so that in adversarial environments, it is logistically impossible as a broke developing government to prevent freedom of speech, arguably.
It's fascinating. Thanks for the explanation.
Cool. I don't see any other questions, so let me finish off with this point on the Twitter bridge. So the Twitter universe is really important to us because it lets people right now perceivably have their own little voice. It was the only time you could interact with somebody at a very high level directly. You could comment, or you could have a comment that because of its retweets, likes, etc., became so prominent that this figurehead, whoever was tweeting, would see your information and could interact with it. It was an amazing tool. It very clearly showed its true colors over the past year. Once those colors were revealed, the importance of Overline as a backup version to Twitter is big. It's also just cooler. It's just cooler because it sucks. When you're not a real freedom of speech engine, but you say you are, that's not cool. You know what is cool? Real freedom of speech. You know what's also financially better? Real freedom of speech, which is why you can see the Twitter stock right after the event change in price. So the freedom kit also has a price on freedom of speech, and it's valuable in the billions. But let's look at the Twitter world. So we're creating this thing called a Twitter bridge that means that whenever you reference a certain tag, and we'll change it every so often to maintain decentralization, we'll automatically have some of our Overline nodes repost your tweet into the Overline universe. And I don't know how long we'll run it for, but I just think it's pretty cool. You'll be able to do XYZ or talk to somebody, but then your tweet can basically go to both internets by referencing this point. We might just make it like @Overline Network. I just don't want it to be that long of a tag. But the point is, like, imagine in the Twitter world, Twitter can just delete your tweet, or you can delete your tweet. And if it's not being archived, it's just gone. But if you wanted to say something important, you could just tag on this one thing, and suddenly it's going to be permanently stored in the Overline chain while the fees are still cheap. And so, like, in the create feed world, it's just super cool that we're going to be able to really quickly index a comment or a point that you made before you left the old internet. And that's kind of how we're like wink, wink looking at this in the Twitter world, is like, you're going to say something and you're on Twitter, but you're only on here until it's just easier and better to go on to Overline full time. But until then, all these people won't know why you're just, hashtag whatever it is, or at whatever it is at the end of it. But when they find out, it's like, wow, when he made a comment, he wasn't just making it for Jack Dorsey to decide whether he should say it. He was making it permanently for the hundreds of copies of whatever the initial Twitter handles are, or he's making it for the permanent record be run for the next 68 years Overline network, history. Like, it's just very cool. We also see versions of the bridge where you could create like a linked transaction where you could go two directions. So in the Overline world, you could @ somebody on your Overline device and then have the Overline bridge, basically talk to them, which would just be kind of cool if you're like totally offline. You're staying on Overline entirely, but you could comment on something through the Overline bridge. So what it'll do is it'll be a bot on Twitter that will listen to the Overline network and grab when you @ somebody. So it's two-way compatible. So the old timers still using Twitter, who haven't moved over. I mean, based on our partnerships, there's going to be a thing with Overline there. But in terms of the network, listening to people when you know that it's anonymous is so much cooler. And that goes to like the non-trackability of this. Right now, no one here, and think about it. When you're writing a tweet, there's a feeling that kicks in that's like, wait, should I say this? Because I could get trolled, whatever it is. Like, that is not freedom of speech. Like, it's basically assuming that someone can smear you with rocks or tomatoes or whatever just because you're typing it, because they'll just track you down. In the Overline world, things are far more anonymous. So what's going to happen is people are going to use NFTs and emblems to prove the credibility of messages, which is just cool. So it's like, oh, that guy's probably not the worst at certain opinions because he has literally 100,000 emblems. And you'll be able to see that in a transaction that's signed. But because every Overline address is compatible with Ethereum and compatible with Bitcoin, like it can two-way directionally assign addresses there, you can have the automatic capabilities of being NFT compatible without signing up to the Jack Dorsey Zuckerberg prison of NFTs in their meta prison. I mean, it's just the worst. Like, it's not real. It's not cool NFTs. Cool is, hey, here's my Ethereum address. It's now fully two-way compatible with the Overline network, which, by the way, allows me to tweet anything I want. And I can still stay fully anonymous, but I can have a badass, CryptoPunk or Ape, or we've been looking at doing, Bored Doge, whatever it is. These things, they're just cool. It lets you, right now, you can't be that ape. I'm not recommending you be the apes. These are dumb. But you can't actually be that. You have to give up your trackability, your advertising, everything to tweet anonymously is impossible, especially if you build an audience. But if you have a balance of 100,000 emblems and, an ape or two or whatever it is, or a CryptoPunk, some credibility indicator at an address, and you start messaging out on Overline, suddenly you've got a point where you can filter conversations by a whole new dimension that isn't just how many thumbs up, did they get, which basically ends up at the who has the nicest butt problem of the Kim Kardashian world. Like, just because you have more likes does not give you prominence, and it should not give you prominence. It could give you advantages to an audience, but it should not be the only or the primary mechanism that, like, an Instagram audience is developed. It's just wrong. It's not, there's no depth to it. Even what I'm saying now, imagine if I tweeted what I just said. Like, I probably would get mauled by somebody for something. That prevents healthy conversation, and it prevents a universe that should exist and will exist with Overline, and it prevents innovation and fostering, like, organic conversation. So yeah, I'm super excited for the Twitter bridge. I'm really excited for you guys to get to the tickets, and I'm frankly just excited to reveal this thing that we've been building for so long quietly. While we've maintained the Overline digital network, which has been a giant handful. But if you can imagine, we've been building both these things in parallel. And that's not a complaint. It's a gift. It's a blessing to, like, do this. But it just should demonstrate the excitement that we have for showing you this, because I am holding in my hands right now something that will completely change the future of Brazil. Like, it will. It just will change the way that you will interact, that kids will learn differently because they may have heard their first piece of information by connecting to an Overline node. Like, you think in a developing nation that data is free and easy? Like, no, when you get a phone in Africa, it sucks. It's bloated with literally Facebook adware and spyware and crap. It's the worst. It's why internet.org was just a masked event to give people Facebook. That's not the universe we should live in. So yeah, I'm going to close there. Great talking to you guys. I think we'll do this more often. One thing, yes, orange matters. And for the guys who are in that group, pay attention to the cards.
That was the Overline podcast. Tune in to listen to us weekly or follow us on Twitter at Overline Network.